Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we transform your stack of research into actionable, high-impact knowledge. Today, we are taking on a figure who is, I think, absolutely essential, but often sort of, hidden in the history of organizational thought. Her name is Mary Parker Follet.
Right. And while you always hear about the classical school thinkers, the big names, Follett was working at the exact same time, and she was quietly mapping out the architecture for so much of what we consider modern cooperation, leadership, even organizational psychology.
And it's not just us saying this. We're charting the territory of the person Peter Drucker. The Peter Drucker, called his personal guru.
He called her the prophet of management. I mean, that's incredibly high praise, and it tells you right away that we're dealing with a real heavyweight, someone whose influence went right to the top, even if her name isn't always on, the intro syllabus.
So our mission today is really to give you the shortcut to understanding her genius. We want to pull out her most relevant, most dynamic insights. Specifically, we're going to look at how she completely redefined conflict and authority.
And in doing that, you'll see how modern cooperative management is actually constructed. I mean, she wasn't just a theorist. She was building practical tools for people.
For people to just work together better.
Exactly. And what's so defining about her right from the start is her focus. The great political thinkers of her day, they were all preoccupied with these huge macro structures, the state, bureaucracy, big government.
Right, the abstract stuff.
Totally abstract.
Yeah.
But Follett, she looked away from that, and she focused her lens on the messy, emerging reality of industry and industrial groups. She got that the dynamics on a factory floor or in a community center were the perfect labs for studying how power and human interaction actually work.
That focus makes her a real pioneer, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Because she understood, way ahead of her time, that management wasn't just about drawing up rigid org charts. It was about managing people. It was about finding practical principles for how diverse groups with, competing interests could actually merge their energies effectively.
And her core philosophy, the thing that connects everything we're going to talk about today, was what she called democratic dynamism. It was this deep belief that when you get groups of people to really participate, to engage their collective energy, they can naturally arrive at better, more practical solutions.
And that's why she's this essential bridge thinker in management history.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack that bridge role for a second, because I think it's critical for context. If you know any management theory, you know the classical school, the Fayolles, the Webers, they were obsessed with rules, hierarchy, efficiency.
The machine model of organization.
The machine model, exactly. Then later comes the human relations school with Elton Mayo and Hawthorne studies, and they suddenly discover that, oh wait, people's feelings and social factors actually matter.
Right, as if it was a surprise.
But Follett, writing right in between these two periods, was already focused on human behavior and social dynamics. Decades before it became a formal movement, she was basically handing the next generation of thinkers the psychological tools they were going to desperately need.
To understand her, though, you really have to look at her background. It's not what you'd expect. She was a brilliant American woman born in 1868, studied at Radcliffe Economics, law, philosophy. But you have to remember, this was a time when academic opportunities for women were, they were incredibly limited.
Radcliffe was the women's college connected to Harvard. But it wasn't Harvard. The doors weren't really open in the same way.
Not at all. So even with this stellar education, a traditional academic career or a job in government administration, it was largely closed off to her.
And that limitation actually turned into a huge theoretical strength, didn't it?
It's the classic case of a constraint forcing innovation.
Instead of staying in an ivory tower theorizing about the state, she had to go out and get her hands dirty with real-world problems.
100%. The defining period of her career wasn't her formal education. It was her hands-on work as a social worker in Boston. This was around 1900 to 1908. She was organizing and running community centers, what they used to call settlement houses.
Okay, let's dig into that a little. Because running a settlement house, that's like being the administrator of a microcosm of society, isn't it?
Yeah.
What kinds of problems was she actually dealing with day to day that would forge these big management theories?
Well, you have to picture Boston at that time, massive immigration. So these centers were just laboratories of conflict and cooperation. Follett was dealing with all these different immigrant groups, many with, deep historical animosities, who now had to share resources and make decisions together.
So things like, who gets the budget for the new library?
Exactly. Or which language classes get priority. Or how do you resolve a screaming match between two neighborhood committees who think the other is hoarding all the influence?
These are real power struggles, real resource allocation fights. The very stuff management theorists try to study in a controlled factory setting, but she was living it.
And she was managing it daily in a very emotionally charged environment. So she wasn't just theorizing about conflict resolution. She was in the trenches, facilitating it in real time between people who had genuine emotional stakes in the outcome.
And that experience, that granularity, is what gave her theories such a practical edge compared to the abstract texts of her time.
Absolutely. She learned that successful administration requires this deep understanding of psychology, of emotion, of social patterns. It's not just about neat charts.
And all of that hands-on work led to her major books. You got The New State in 1918, then Creative Experience in 1924.
Which is probably her most famous. Yeah, it details all her ideas on conflict and integration.
And then Dynamic Administration, which was published after she died in 1941, and it collected all her key papers.
So the so what here for anyone listening today is just immense. Why should you care about a thinker from a century ago? Because her theories on democracy, conflict, power, they are fundamental to how modern organizations actually try to operate.
Right. If you work in a company that uses, say, matrix structures or agile teams or any kind of empowered decision-making,
You are standing on Follet's shoulders.
when we talk about collaborative governance or network models, things that are staples of management today, we are speaking her language.
She was the counterweight to that mechanical view of the classical school, where Taylor was looking at the physical motions of a worker.
And Fayol was looking at the chain of command.
Follett looked squarely at human behavior, how beliefs, habits, and expectations were the things that determined whether any structure, no matter how perfectly designed, would actually work or just fail.
She's really the foundational thinker for, like, all of modern HR and organizational psychology.
Oh, a question.
Okay, let's move into what might be her most radical idea. This notion that conflict isn't a disease to be cured, but a resource to be harnessed. This is the core of her paper on constructive conflict.
And this is such a direct challenge to the entire industrial paradigm of her time. I mean, for the classical guys like Frederick Winslow Taylor, conflict was just inefficiency. It meant strikes, delays, waste, a lack of control.
Their whole system, scientific management, was about eliminating friction. Standardize the task, define the one best way, and you get rid of any reason to argue.
Hierarchy and command were the tools used to just squash dissent.
But Follett just completely flips that script. She says conflict is normal, it's unavoidable, and it's not inherently good or bad. It's just a difference of opinions or interests.
Which is what you'd expect, right? If you have a group of smart, engaged people working on something important, they're going to have different perspectives. It's natural.
So instead of treating it as this wasteful warfare, we have to recognize it as a process that can actually help the organization.
It's essential. It's how valuable differences are brought to light. If you and I each hold a different piece of the truth, the only way to get to the whole truth is for those pieces to rub up against each other.
It's that dynamic tension, and she had that great analogy that just sticks with you.
Oh, it's perfect.
All polishing is done by friction.
Exactly. You need that pressure, that abrasion, to get a better result. So the goal isn't to eliminate conflict, which you can't do anyway, but to learn how to use it constructively.
And if you're going to use it, you need a framework. You need to understand the different ways people try to resolve it.
And she gives us 3, and they're still so recognizable in any boardroom or team meeting today.
Okay, the first and maybe the most instinctive one is domination. The classic win-lose.
Domination is so tempting because it's the path of least intellectual resistance, right? The manager just pulls rank, the majority votes down the minority, the department with the biggest budget gets its way. It feels final.
It feels final in the moment, but Follett is crystal clear that domination fails in the long run.
And this insight is so critical.
Because you can force someone to comply, but you can't force them to be committed.
You can't. The losing side just feels repressed. They feel angry. They feel unheard. And that conflict doesn't just evaporate. It goes underground. It turns into passive aggression or foot dragging or even subtle sabotage. The original problem isn't solved, the relationship is damaged, and that conflict will bubble back up.
And probably at the worst possible time right before a deadline.
Inevitably.
Okay, so method 2. The one we're all taught is a virtue. Compromise, meeting in the middle.
And Follett really challenges this. She sees compromise not as a win-win, but as a lose-lose.
A lose-lose. That's
Yeah.
a powerful reframing.
Think about it. When two teams are fighting over a budget of, say, $100,000 and they agree to split it 50-50, that seems fair. But Follett points out that people rarely want to compromise because both sides have to sacrifice something they genuinely believed was necessary for the best outcome.
Right. So the R&D team needed $80,000 to get a critical feature built. They only get 50. They walk away feeling like the company just underinvested in the future.
And they feel cheated. Meanwhile, the sales team feels they didn't get enough to properly launch the current product, so both sides are unhappy.
Compromise just papers over the problem, as she put it. It's a temporary truce you get by making everyone a little bit unhappy.
And critically, it doesn't create any new value. It just carves up the existing pie. And neither side is fully bought into the half-baked plan they ended up with.
Which, of course, brings us to her ideal, the third way, integration.
This is the goal she champions. Integration is about aiming for a true win-win. It's where the desires of both sides are integrated so successfully that, in her words, neither side needs to sacrifice its desires.
Okay, so that sounds great, but
Yeah.
very demanding.
Eh.
How is it different from a really good compromise? What makes it superior?
Because it's the only method that forces you into creative invention. Integration means you have to move past the surface-level positions, what people say they want, and uncover their underlying interests, what they actually need.
And by doing that, you can invent a third solution.
A totally new solution. A new idea, a different technique, a better process that satisfies the root goals of both groups and makes their initial conflict irrelevant. It solves the root of the problem permanently.
Okay, let's use a concrete example to make this real. Let's say the conflict is between R&D and sales. R&D says, we need 6 months in total isolation to perfect this new product. That's position A. Sales says, no way, we need to release it in 3 months, even if it's imperfect, to meet market demand. Position B.
Okay, so a compromise would be, what, 4.5 months?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And R&D feels rushed and sales feels late. Everyone's unhappy.
So integration would mean digging into the underlying needs. R&D's real need isn't just time. It's about quality control and protecting the company's reputation.
And sales' need isn't just speed. It's about generating revenue and getting a foothold in the market before a competitor does.
Right, so an integrated solution might be something new entirely. It might be. Let's release a minimal viable product, an MVP, in just 3 months. That satisfies sales' timeline.
But, and here's the integration, we only release it to a small, private pilot group.
Exactly. That satisfies R&D's need for quality control. Then R&D uses the real-world feedback from that pilot group to perfect the product for the big global launch in month 6. And now marketing has real testimonials to use for that launch.
So the solution isn't a split decision. It's a brand new phased rollout strategy that addresses the core goals of both teams. That is some serious intellectual heavy lifting.
It is. And Follet was a realist. She knew it wasn't always possible.
Right. She gave that stark example of 2 men wanting to marry the same woman. Some things just can't be integrated.
It's a good reminder of the limits. But her guiding principle holds. Even if you might fail, the highest calling of management is to always try for integration first. We have to train ourselves to look past the drama of the stated positions and really hunt for those deep underlying needs.
So integration is the ideal, but how do you actually do it? Follet gives us these specific, actionable steps, the bases, that turn this from a nice idea into a practical tool. Let's lay out that how-to guide.
Yeah, if the classical school gave us flowcharts, Follet gave us process guides for cooperation. And the first step is so simple, but so vital. Bring differences into the open.
Honesty is the prerequisite. But that's hard. How does a manager make sure they're getting the real difference and not just, the performance of the conflict?
Well, that's the art of management, isn't it? Follet knew that people often hide their real concerns. Things like status or fear of failure or a lack of training behind safer surface-level arguments about budgets or schedules. The manager has to create an environment of trust where you can gently probe. So if someone says, we can't do this because of staffing, you can find out if the real issue is, I don't trust my people to handle this new technology.
You can't integrate what you can't see.
Precisely. You cannot hope to integrate unless you know what the true underlying differences are.
Okay, so that's step 1. Get the real issue on the table. Step 2 is equally rigorous. Break demands into parts.
Right. This is about stopping treating the conflict as one big, scary, monolithic thing. You have to analyze the constituent parts of what both sides are asking for. This requires, as she put it, a careful scrutinizing of the language.
So if a team comes to you with a big, vague demand like, we need more flexibility, that's useless for integration.
It's totally useless. The manager have to help them break it down. What does flexibility actually mean? Does it mean choosing your start time? Does it mean the authority to pick a different supplier? Does it mean changing the product specs?
And when you break that big, stubborn demand down into its 5 or 6 smaller practical pieces,
It often becomes clear that you can agree on 3 or 4 of them immediately, and now you're just working on 1 or 2 real points of friction. It defangs the conflict and makes it manageable.
this sounds so much like modern, interest-based negotiation tactics.
It's the intellectual DNA of those tactics. Now, the third basis is probably her most sophisticated concept, and we should spend some time on it. It's the idea of how to anticipate conflict using circular response.
This is what really separated her from the linear, mechanical thinkers of her day. Let's make sure we get this right. How is human interaction not a simple cause and effect?
Well, the classical school saw it as linear. A, the manager gives an order, causes B, the employee responds. Simple. Follet says this completely ignores psychological reality. Human interaction is a continuous, dynamic loop. It's not a punch. It's more like a tennis rally.
So if I'm the manager giving an order, and you're the employee, my order is shaped not just by the task at hand, but by my history with you, by my expectation of how you're going to react.
Exactly. And your response, B, is shaped by my order, A, but it's also shaped by your expectation of my next move, C. It's a constant feedback loop. My action is influenced by my anticipation of your response, and your response is influenced by your interpretation of my intent. It circles back instantly. That's the circular response.
So a history of, say, bad management doesn't just poison past interactions. It actively shapes my ability to give a good order today. If I expect you to resist, I might give a harsher order.
But guarantees you'll resist, which fulfills my original expectation. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of conflict. And Follett's insight was that understanding this loop, how our expectations shape the very first action, is the key to constructive conflict. If managers can proactively get into that loop, they can disrupt those dysfunctional patterns.
It's an incredibly psychological approach to management.
Deeply.
Okay, so if integration is this powerful, but requires so much intelligence and psychological insight, why don't we see it everywhere? Follet was also very clear about the obstacles.
Yes, and the barriers are both structural and psychological. First, and this is a big one, is just sheer intellectual laziness. Integration requires high intelligence and a lot of creativity. It's easier for a manager under pressure to fall back on what they know, fighting, dominating, or compromising.
And then there's the psychological barrier, the simple allure of power.
She was very clear-eyed about this. She knew that some people in any organization just enjoy domination. They get a thrill of conquest. For them, a conflict isn't a problem to be solved for the good of the company. It's a personal game to be won. Their ego is all tied up in that win-lose outcome.
There's also that classic administrative trap, the tendency to theorize the problem instead of just solving it.
Oh, this is a killer in any bureaucracy. A conflict comes up over scheduling. Instead of getting the 2 teams in a room to integrate their needs, what do?
We launch a 6-month committee to study optimal scheduling theory.
We intellectualize the problem to avoid the hard, practical work of solving it. It's a form of paralysis.
And finally, she points out that language itself can be a barrier. We use it to arouse antagonism instead of to promote understanding.
But here's her most important insight about all these obstacles, and it's a really optimistic one. She argued that the single biggest barrier of all is a simple lack of training. People just aren't taught the art of cooperative thinking.
So if a team always defaults to domination or lazy compromise, it's not proof that integration is impossible. It's proof of a gap in their training.
Exactly. Cooperation, integration, constructive conflict. These are not innate talents. They are skills that can be taught and learned.
That's a huge shift. It puts the responsibility squarely on the organization to train its people better.
It does. And it moves the focus from punishing conflict to educating for cooperation, which is actually the perfect transition to her ideas on authority. Because if conflict is a training issue, then authority needs to be redefined as an educational functional concept too.
That's a great bridge. Follet saw that failed conflict and failed authority come from the same root, treating management as a personal power trip instead of a functional necessity. So she turns her focus to the most basic managerial act, giving orders.
Right. For someone like Follet or Weber, an order works because of hierarchy. The authority comes from the position. Simple. Follet looked around and saw that orders fail all the time, even when they come from the CEO. And she asked, why?
And the answer was that the order runs smack into people's existing habit patterns or their mental attitudes.
You can't just issue a command and expect behavior to change. The order might be logical, but it's psychologically disruptive.
If a worker has a deeply ingrained habit for doing something a certain way, a new order isn't just a policy change. It feels like a personal, emotional imposition.
So Follett argued, you can't just change the policy, you have to change the underlying habits first.
And she laid out a three-step process for this, which is basically a blueprint for behavioral science, decades early. First, you have to build up certain attitudes. You have to make the new way desirable.
You have to sell it. You convince the subordinate that the new way is better, more efficient, better for their career. You create the will to comply, not just the mandate to obey.
Then, step two, you have to provide for their release.
Give them a clear, supported opportunity to act on that new attitude. Make the window for trying the new habit obvious and safe.
And finally, you augment the released response. You reinforce the new behavior as soon as it happens.
Positive feedback loop. It shows how deeply she was thinking about psychology. A successful order wasn't a declaration, it was a managed process of habit formation.
She also brought in these really interesting contextual factors, like how the effectiveness of an order is in inverse ratio to the distance the order travels.
Which just makes so much sense. A nuanced order delivered face-to-face where you can manage that circular response loop in real time is going to work way better than some impersonal memo passed down 5 levels of bureaucracy.
And of course, the personal manner of delivery. Authority delivered with arrogance, with overbearing conduct, is guaranteed to create resistance no matter how good the order is.
And all of this leads directly to her big solution, her way of taking the ego out of the equation.
This is her most famous concept, isn't it? The solution to the whole authoritarian trap, depersonalizing the orders.
It's her masterpiece. She saw managers trapped between 2 bad options, being a dictator or being so permissive that they give no orders at all. Her solution just cuts right through that. She says, stop thinking of authority as belonging to a person, the boss, or a position, the job title. Authority, she says, must come from the facts of the situation. This is the law of the situation.
And that is a revolutionary shift. Because if the law of the situation is in charge, it means both the manager and the employee have to become joint investigators. They both have to study to discover the law of the situation.
And once that investigation is done, once the facts are agreed upon, the deadlines, the resources, the market data, then both parties agree to take their orders from the situation. It's an agreement based on functional necessity, not on personal power.
The situation is the boss.
That's the phrase.
It totally reframes a manager's job. Your role isn't to impose your will. It's to help your team clearly see what the objective facts require all of you to do next.
But let's pause on a critical challenge here. This sounds wonderfully democratic, but couldn't the law of the situation paralyze you in a real crisis? I mean, isn't that when you just need old-fashioned command and control, when the building is on fire?
That's a really important point. If you have to stop and study the situation while the fire is spreading, the whole thing could go up in smoke.
Follet actually addresses this. She points out that relying on rigid hierarchy is often slower in a complex crisis because the information has to travel all the way up the chain and then all the way back down, getting distorted at every step. The law of the situation, while it needs that initial cooperative study, can lead to much faster execution. If the boss and employee are already jointly focused on the facts, they can agree and act immediately based on what's necessary.
It cuts out all the personal arguments and the bureaucratic delays. But the key is that both parties have to have access to and agree upon the same set of facts.
Yes, it demands radical transparency, shared information, mutual trust, and a willingness to accept expertise no matter where it comes from in the hierarchy.
She used that example of 2 department heads, right? Engineering and production.
Yeah. Engineering doesn't order production around, and vice versa. They get together, they study the shared objective facts, the production schedule, the engineering tolerances, the client deadlines, and those facts dictate what both of them need to do.
And this depersonalized approach, it just fundamentally changes the whole workplace dynamic.
It allows people to work with their manager, not under them. And she argued that this single change dramatically heightens self-respect and increases efficiency.
Because when an employee understands why they're doing something, because the situation demands it, they're just going to be more motivated than if they're just doing it because the boss said so.
And because the situation is never static, your orders have to be dynamic too. This is why just relying on an old rule book never works. The law of yesterday's situation is probably irrelevant today.
And this reframes supervision too. It's not about watching people to make sure they're complying.
Not at all. It's about jointly accomplishing the goal. The manager's role becomes one of education for the subordinate, helping them learn to read the situation better and respond more functionally.
The supervisor becomes a coach, a facilitator of learning, not a cop.
It's an incredibly sophisticated, deeply effective view of leadership. It's the foundation for things we talk about today, like servant leadership or agile coaching.
What an amazing body of work. She really did provide the intellectual blueprint for so much of modern organizational life. If we were to synthesize it, what's a common thread that binds all these big ideas together?
Well, every single concept we talked about, constructive conflict, integration, the law of the situation, they are all built on this unwavering foundation, a foundation of participation, cooperation, and a profound respect for the individual's psychology and expertise.
She was saying, look, you cannot manage complex organizations just with mechanical structures and rules. That was the blind spot of her contemporaries.
She saw that the true power of an organization is in its ability to harness differences productively.
She showed us that by understanding psychological dynamics like that circular response, managers could move beyond lazy compromise and invent genuinely superior outcomes. Authority is functional, not personal.
She provided that missing piece, that psychological and social foundation that is absolutely necessary for any organization to succeed. She proved that the best way to get discipline isn't through strict command, it's through a shared investigation of reality with your team.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, the listener, as you take this back into your own work. If authority is truly functional, if it's derived from the specific problem at hand, then you have to ask yourself, what critical situation in your own life or work are you currently treating as a personal conflict? I mean, where are you looking for domination or just accepting a painful compromise because you haven't yet tried a cooperative study of the problem?
That's a question.
If you can stop focusing on who is right and start focusing together on what the situation actually demands, is your next big argument actually a creative, integrated, and far superior new idea just waiting to be born?
Food for thought. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
We'll catch you next time.